Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And after being back from our brief break, we have a big show for you today. We will be reviewing Marvel and Netflix superhero team-up show Defenders and looking at the rest of Series 7 of Game of Thrones. We'll also be discussing stylish new thriller Atomic Blonde and finding out what I thought of Nick's recommendation, Master of None. But before all of that, Nick, what have you been up to over the last month since we chatted?
Well, I went on holiday to Amsterdam, but that's not really a pop culture experience. Although I did go to the Van Gogh Museum, and for the record, if you're in Amsterdam, the Van Gogh Museum is really, really cool. It's a well laid out, immersive exhibit. I know you may feel like you've seen enough Van Gogh, and if you started aggressively hating it, then fair enough. But if you're in Amsterdam and you've got some time, then the Van Gogh Museum is good, although you may have to queue to get in, which is, well, mildly annoying, but you know, we're British, we're used to it at this stage. But anyway, more universal pop culture experiences. I finished, I think I mentioned this before, my read of the His Dark Materials trilogy, with the conclusion of the Amber Spyglass, which was pretty long, but I did finish it. And yeah, that's a pretty good trilogy. I think I do perhaps see why some people frame the Amber Spyglass as a bit disappointing. It does feel like he sort of, I don't know, what I sort of slightly snarkily term success bloat, wherein an author becomes quite popular, and the first book they release after becoming popular is suspiciously about twice the length. Yeah, there's a bit of the success bloat in Amber Spyglass. It does feel a bit sort of, this used to be a sort of quite contained adventure where you would stay with one perspective, and now there's about 6 perspectives, and the book is trying to do this massive sprawling sense of the epic, which it does almost pull off, to be fair. There's just sort of a bit in the middle where it sort of sends them on a bit of a side quest that does feel like it's kind of just there to make the book a bit longer.
Did you like the ending?
I had kind of had the ending spoilt to me by pop cultural osmosis. There have been other things that have ended in a similar way. I guess I shouldn't pass on the pain by doing the same spoiler. But other things have had similar ending gimmicks, and people have said, oh, it's just like His Dark Materials. So I was sort of, when you know that and you know roughly what the gimmick of His Dark Materials is, it is possible to guess roughly what the ending will be. Obviously, it's still very sad when it happens.
Yeah, I thought the ending was definitely very sad. It really does pull at the heartstrings. There is quite a lot of meandering on the way through the last book, but I think it does kind of build up to a very emotional and quite sad conclusion, which I thought, after sort of 1,000 odd pages across all 3 books, it does, I think, have a payoff that's kind of worth it at the end.
Yeah, I think despite the slight meander in the middle of the 3rd book, I think there is definitely a sense that it has a beginning, middle and end, and it's a very satisfying trilogy. It does feel like everything that's been happening since the beginning has come together into this conclusion. His new book, The Book of Dust, is meant to be, I don't know, he's sort of resisted people trying to make him characterise it as a prequel or a sequel. It's like an everything-quel or something. So I don't know whether he'll be undoing or extending or somehow tweaking the ending of His Dark Materials. I sort of hope not. I've no idea if this book will be good or not, but I'm sure I'll read it anyway.
I assume that it's a different story set in the same universe, a sort of like concurrent sort of story that exists elsewhere. So that like the 2 stories probably won't overlap very much, and the fact they've got the sort of the same broad backdrop.
I think, did he say somewhere that Liva was in it? I can't remember. I would need to sit here and Google it, and that's probably terrible podcasting. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's going to be engaging with at least some of what happens in the 3 books, and it's going to take place, it sounds like, both before and after them, across this new trilogy he's doing. We'll have to wait and see. But yeah, I'm interested how much he'll, if any, he'll take the opportunity to retcon his old books.
Oh, well, I'm glad you enjoyed it, and I'm glad you got to the end before the much rumoured BBC TV adaptation.
Yes, I have finally finished that classic. Well done me. Alistair, what have you been up to?
Well, since we last spoke, I've been away at the World Science Fiction Convention in Helsinki, also known as Worldcon 75. It was an interesting 5 days of hanging out with a lot of other sci-fi and fantasy fans, going to panels, listening to authors and sort of experts in their fields give talks. Went to a live recording of the podcast Tea in Jeopardy. It's a very good podcast, comes highly recommended. This was a live session where they had George R.R. Martin.
So it's a bit of a get, isn't it?
Yeah, a bit of a get. Yeah, that was probably one of the most well-attended events at the convention. I won't spoil any of it, so if you want to find out what George had to say, you should go and listen to the episode. Went to a recording of another podcast called Ditch Diggers.
Oh, that's a good show. I listened to that.
Yeah, that's with Mur Lafferty, another author. But yeah, that was interesting. There were panels on military SF. There were panels on urban fantasy. There were panels on cyberpunk. All sorts of things. Injury mechanics. basically. So if you want to learn what hurting your characters is likely to actually do to them, sort of physically, tools for writers and software and stuff. There was like just such a range of different panels. I think I went to 28 events in total, plus various like parties and hangouts and stuff. So too much to summarize here. just showing off for how much I did.
I did 3 days at Nine Worlds. I didn't actually count my panels because I didn't do it just to show off on a podcast, but I think I must have hit about probably just 16 or 15, 16, 17, I think.
Yeah, it was a good experience. I recommended it. Yeah, I came back with lots of novel recommendations that people were talking about. So certainly the buzz was everyone should be reading Ada Palmer's 2 Like the Lightning.
Okay, I've not heard of it, but I don't pretend to be that down with the prose SFF scene, to be honest.
Yeah, so there were also other books recommended. Was The Obelisk Gate, which I believe is a sequel to a Hugo Award-winning novel, The Fifth Season.
I have heard of those. That's N.K. Jemisin, isn't it?
Yeah. So, yeah, I can imagine those would be things I'll be reading in the near future, and you might be hearing about them on the podcast. So it's always good to come back with a long list of book recommendations. It
was a good con for Tea and Jeopardy, wasn't it? Because they also won a Hugo, as well as having George R. R. Martin on.
Yeah, they had a good 5 days. Yeah, and thoroughly deserved their Hugo win. They've been doing the podcast for quite a while and have had some pretty stellar guests.
They've been nominated before, I think. But yeah, Pete and Emma Newman are deservedly some of the most sort of popular and liked people on the sort of science fiction fantasy, especially the British sci-fi fantasy scene. So I feel like it's one of these wins people can't really begrudge. Okay, first up today, it's The Defenders, or Marvel's The Defenders, or Netflix's Marvel's The Defenders. This is the team-up series, teaming up the 4 characters who have had Netflix series over the last few years. That's Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage and Iron Fist, in a battle against the Hand, the villains from Iron Fist and the latter season of Daredevil, which I have bad-mouthed repeatedly on this podcast and will be bad-mouthing again shortly. So yes, this series features those 4 heroes teaming up to take on the Hand and have some snappy banter with each other. It's 8 episodes. I'll get on to my opinion in a minute. Alistair, what did you think of it?
I would say good, but not excellent.
That is an overwhelming theme of my notes as well, yes. Carry on.
Yeah. I know, it certainly was entertaining to watch, but it wasn't perfect by any means. When it's good, it's got these really good sort of elements of a kind of urban fantasy, noir, sort of crime thriller, blending elements of they're investigating sort of criminal syndicates and sort of corporate wrongdoing. That's kind of, when underneath it, there's this kind of supernatural plot line. The best bits kind of remind me of like kind of novels of Ben Aranovich or Paul Cornell. So yeah, when it's good, it's as good as that sort of stuff. When it's bad, it's kind of like a bad fantasy novel that is more sort of interested in its internal world and, the sort of the lore of the universe it's built up rather than telling an actual story. So it kind of flitted from being very good to being sort of a bit not very good. My main other takeaway is that I kind of enjoyed the 4 principals characters in pretty much the order that I enjoyed their shows. So, for example, I enjoyed it the most when Jessica Jones was on screen. Then I enjoyed Luke Cage's plots the second most. And then probably Daredevil's plots the third most. And Iron Fist I still found was a bit sort of boring and underwhelming as a character.
Yeah, I'll get on to specifics with Iron Fist in a minute. But yeah, as a whole, I've got, my first bullet point is, yes, it's fine. Not amazing, but fine. Good, but not great. Yeah, it's fairly sort of slap in the middle of the whole Netflix spectrum, really. There have been some points where it's been great. Like the first half of Luke Cage Series 1, most of Jessica Jones, the really good bits of Daredevil, and there have been some bits where it's been a bit crap, like the crapper Hand episodes of Daredevil, most of Iron Fist, some of the slightly weird stuff in the second half of Cage. And Defenders, I think, has managed to smack itself straight in the middle of that. It's nowhere near as bad as some of the really bad stuff, for the most part, but it's also doesn't often threaten to be as good as the really good stuff. I mean, that's the thing with these, with these team-ups, with everything slapping together, with this many corporate demands on the whole thing, I suppose, it's probably quite rare that something like the first Avengers film happens, and it actually somehow, the whole does become better than the sum of its parts, and it rises to become something really cool and fun. A lot of the time it is just going to be a thing that's clearly trying to serve about 17 masters and doing an alright job of all of them.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I've kind of felt that they got together the first hurdle of being good, which is the kind of action plus banter combination. They had charismatic characters, sort of interesting plot line. I thought the 4 principal performers were all very good in their parts. No criticisms there. And they had, like, the script was competent enough to kind of carry you along. So it had the template for goodness, which we've sort of established across this podcast, just seemed to be the kind of action plus banter. But it didn't have anything more than that. It didn't have that, what we sometimes described as like transcendence. It didn't do anything that really struck me as like, wow, this is really interesting or original.
I don't know, I would be slightly willing to criticise one of the four principles. Predictably, it's Iron Fist. In that, I don't know, I think especially when viewed next to the other three, you know, Charlie Cox as Daredevil, Kristen Ritter as Jessica Jones, and Mike Coulter as Luke Cage, I think Finn Jones as Iron Fist just doesn't quite have it. The other three do have a certain effortless charisma that has sort of carried their shows through, even the bits where they were a bit slow or a bit not so good. Whereas Finn Jones, I don't know, he has his moments. There are some bits where he's like bantering with Luke Cage, which have clearly been worked on really hard, because Luke Cage and Iron Fist as comedy double act is a really big thing in the comics, and they clearly want to try and build to doing something with that. So those bits were clearly workshopped to death, and it does show, I think, because those are the parts where Finn Jones seems to relax into it a bit, and he actually has quite a nice rapport with Mike Coulter.
Yeah.
But a lot of his other stuff, particularly a lot of his slightly sulky solo stuff, where it's just him and Colleen stropping about their hands, really don't scream charisma to me.
I always put that at the feet of the character more than the actor, that Danny Rand and Iron Fist isn't just a particularly interesting character. I mean, they've tried to give him as much personality as possible, but it is... You know, I just don't find the character very interesting. He's a sort of a billionaire who seems quite detached from the real world, because when he's not being a billionaire, he's fighting a sort of secret, mystical organisation. He has very little connection to the real world, apart from his girlfriend, who's also mixed up in this with him, and who he doesn't actually seem to talk to that much or have much, I don't know, physical intimacy with. So, yeah,
not that the sex scene in Iron Fist was amazing, so let's not rush to that.
I don't mean like having like a sex scene, just they don't seem to like show much affection for each other or really like...
I know, I just wanted to make a shitty joke about the sex scene in Iron Fist.
Oh, fair enough. But unlike, say, like the scenes between Luke Cage and Jessica Jones, that have you can see there's a real like warmth between the characters, even though they both have quite messy relationships with each other and with other people. But you get this real sense of like warmth there, whereas it's just kind of lacking from the relationship between Danny Rand and Carleen Wing.
Yeah, I think Iron Fist is... I don't know. Iron Fist it seems to be doomed to be viewed as the weak link in all this. The idea of him as this sort of slightly arrogant yet naive blowhard, which I think might be roughly what they're going for, but they seem to be... The plot seems to demand that they take him vaguely seriously as a destined warrior, but they seem to be also want to do the characterisation of him that actually sort of works is this idea of him as a sort of slightly well-meaning fool, and the two don't really blend particularly well, and he just does a lot of stupid things, but in a very I'm doing this because I'm a destined warrior, and the show seems to be sort of taking him seriously way, and it just ends up with this really weird character who does things like storm into the foyer of that evil company and he demands to see the CEOs, who just happen to be sitting in a room waiting for him. Then the receptionist says quite reasonably, are they expecting you? And then Danny Rand goes, not like this! What does that mean? That got a laugh in my living room.
Yeah, that was the moment when the show went from being punchy to business. They suddenly decided in the middle, no, we'll have a corporate plot line in here.
Oh, come on. The business section didn't last long. They literally went to the business building, had like 2 minutes of conversation, then the punching started.
Yeah, then it went back from business to punchy quite quickly.
Those 2 glorious minutes where he didn't hit anyone.
But also in that scene was probably the standout new character they created for Defenders, which is the character of Alexandra, played by Sigourney Weaver.
Yeah.
I thought Sigourney Weaver was very good in this part. She kind of gave the boss villain this like real presence. I guess it's not too much of a spoiler to discuss something that appears in like the first half of the first episode.
Probably not, no. There were some twists with that storyline later on, but I was going to avoid mentioning. But yeah, the first episode you could probably get away with.
Yeah, I'd say kind of it opens with her sort of being diagnosed that she has a terminal condition and she's going to die in the next few weeks, maybe months at most. And then obviously all of the characters' actions are driven by this desperate need I need to accomplish my evil scheme quickly, and sometimes like recklessly quickly. And I thought that added an interesting sort of dimension to the character, that you can really tell what's driving them, because, if you discovered that you only had a few weeks to live, you would really think, well, what do I want to achieve with the time I've got left? And she's really driven by that. And I think Sigourney Weaver has this whole kind of, I'm very composed outwardly, but you can tell kind of the tension is there beneath the surface because she's under such pressure because, her own body is failing her, but she still needs to do these important things. So I thought, yes, Sigourney Weaver was very well cast in that part, and she did a great performance.
Yeah, I thought she was pretty good. I think, it was quite easy for the villain to get drowned in this show, which is very clearly, obviously, primarily about let's see these heroes interact. I thought she did a good job of, actually having a motivation and keeping the villain side of the plot line going along okay. I don't think she was... I mean, the Netflix shows have actually, unlike the movies sometimes, have actually had quite good villains. So it is a bit of a competition to be up against. I don't think she's quite up there with the David Tennant villain from Jessica Jones, or the Kingpin, or the Mahershala Ali one from Luke Cage. But she is pretty good, and she does, do a lot with a fairly small part. And, to move on to the inevitable, Nick slags off the hand section of this. This was probably the best hand storyline yet, although that's obviously, number one in a field of two others which are terrible. This was, the period of the hand writers thought these villains are acceptable if slightly bland, rather than these villains are terrible and dragging down the entire story.
Yeah, I'm not particularly impressed by the hand storylines, and this was, as you say, it was probably the hand at their best, partly because they were doing kind of the culmination of the hand plotline, which meant they actually got to kind of reveal some things about the hand and do the big storyline. Previously, because they weren't kind of doing the big hand storyline in the previous shows, it kind of felt very much so like they were just this thing that was there to create kind of henchmen villains that the heroes could beat up. Whereas at least now they actually there was some kind of plot progression with the hand that was interesting, but there's just still, I don't know, there's something about this kind of ancient secret organization of ninjas hell-bent on destroying New York that it just... I guess the point in Defenders, the Defenders universe, is it's supposed to be like a bit more realistic and a bit more believable than, say, the Avengers storyline. I think the hand could work really well in something like, Doctor Strange.
The main reason I'm feeling a bit less harsh towards this hand storyline is, I guess, at least it finally went somewhere. And also because the focus was quite clearly being drawn off by, again, as I said, the four heroes talking. It didn't leave quite so much of the show to lean on the hands are just sort of there. The shows clearly know that for the hand to work, they need to have, strong figures at the front to represent them. And they've completely failed to do that for the previous two appearances. Whereas this time they had Alexandra, Sigourney Weaver, and also, following up from the end of Daredevil, they had Daredevil's brainwashed ex-girlfriend, which did at least give the hand a bit more to cling on to.
Yeah, they made them a bit more tangible. And also by introducing some other kind of top-level hand people who could be villains in various forms. I just felt the plot wasn't particularly interesting. I don't want to reveal kind of what their big nefarious scheme is. I just never really felt particularly engaged with that storyline.
Yeah, I mean, I think I watched a video on this by the critic Movie Bob, who's quite good if you want some pop culture criticism, who pointed out that sticking to the hand as the main feature of this show does display an impressive level of sticking to your corporate plan despite, it obviously not working out too well. I mean, maybe I'm just misjudging the level of criticism that gets through to Marvel, but you feel like they must have noticed the level of general mockery of the hand as an effective villain in Daredevil and later on in Iron Fist, although it may have been too late to change it by the time Iron Fist happened. But, I don't know, perhaps impressively or perhaps foolishly, they clearly had this plan. This is quite clearly what Defenders was always going to be, and they have, I don't know what tweaks they may or may not have made, but they seem to have more or less stuck to it. I don't know whether something like Sigourney Weaver was brought in at the last minute because they just desperately wanted a big name actor to maybe give the hand a bit more gravitas, and in which case, well done, it did kind of work.
Yeah, although I was left a bit cold by the hand stuff, I did enjoy the kind of the group dynamics between the combinations they can pair up the characters they built up over the course of the previous sort of 5 series.
Yeah, Jessica Jones and Daredevil work surprisingly entertainingly as a double act, I found. That was a combination that isn't even done that much in the comics, but it was quite fun.
Yeah, that was definitely good. And obviously we know that Jessica Jones and Luke Cage work well together from their show. Yeah,
it did successfully make me want another season of Daredevil and Jessica Jones. It sort of reminded me, I haven't seen you for a while, and I actually quite like you. Which, helpfully, I think we're getting both of those things next year.
And also, as you said before, the interaction between Luke Cage and Danny Rand was interesting. Yeah, they had some good scenes there. Obviously, playing on the differences between the characters, kind of a rich white, billionaire and a poor black man from Harlem. Both obviously representing how New York is obviously one city, but totally different cities to different people.
Yeah, I don't know to what extent they'll ever get around to fully exploring the Cage and Iron Fist team-up vibe. They had a team-up series that ran for quite a long time.
More Luke Cage in a second series of Iron Fist would probably make that second series much better. Putting Iron Fist into the second series of Luke Cage, well, it would bring in an interesting dynamic. They did kind of do a good job of exploring the political issues, of a bulletproof black man in 2017 America in the the series of Luke Cage. So if they want to continue exploring the kind of political issues about race and wealth and inequality in America, putting Danny Rand into the Luke Cage show would be an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, I don't know what they're going to do, really. I gather there's meant to be a Misty Knight storyline in Series 2 of Iron Fist, so maybe they're going to shuffle the characters around a bit, but who knows? I have to wait and see. It's weird, even though I don't think Defenders itself was amazing, it did sort of at least make me come away thinking, yeah, I like those characters, I like the general vibe of this whole thing. I am probably on board for future seasons of Daredevil and stuff, especially Daredevil. I did almost more than Jessica Jones, actually, weirdly, even though I think her show was a bit better. I thought Daredevil came out of this quite well, maybe just because this is basically what a show by the Daredevil showrunners. It's what they're doing this year instead of another season of Daredevil. So the fact that the Daredevil storyline and Daredevil's emotional arc were in some ways quite front and centre.
Yeah.
Like, Daredevil probably had the biggest straight emotional arc. Iron Fist's story was, I don't know, I guess it was quite prominent just because of Iron Fist's story being quite intertwined with the Hand. And Luke Cage and Jessica Jones were kind of just background fun to an extent.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons for this is obviously Daredevil's had 2 series to develop as a character. The others have only had 1. Also, Daredevil is the most recognisable and well-known character to the general public, mainly because of that Ben Affleck film, and also just generally the character just seems to have resonated more. But you're right, this definitely made me really keen to see more series of both Luke Cage and Jessica Jones. I really was after this thinking like, man, I really should go back and rewatch that first series of Jessica Jones because it is very, very good.
Again, I came away more wanting to rewatch Daredevil, although there's so much television nowadays, I doubt I'll ever actually do it. I'll probably just wait for season 3 and watch that.
Yeah. The one thing I did notice, though, especially early on in Defenders, before they've kind of all met up and sort of aware of each other, whenever they cut to Luke Cage's storyline, the way it was shot would go a little bit more documentary style than the others, and the quality of the music would improve massively.
Oh, did you not see the colours? That was the best part.
Yeah, and the colours went slightly muted as well, yeah.
But it was the same for all of them, and especially the first 2 episodes, which were a bit slow and should really just have been 1 episode. Basically, like all the Netflix shows, Defenders could be cut by about a third with the same plot. This would improve it a lot. But this just seems to be what they're doing with these shows. They're just all about a third too long. But anyway, in the first couple of episodes, when they're all separate, there's this really obvious colour scheme matching, where all the Daredevil stuff is saturated in red, all the Cage stuff is sort of yellow, all the Iron Fist stuff is sort of green, and all the Jessica Jones is sort of purpley blue. Yeah. It's really, really funny. Because it's just so obvious as it cuts between them. Yeah.
The Luke Cage one is definitely, it goes a bit more handheld and kind of there's less filtering of the footage, so it looks a bit rawer. And yeah, there's
yellow.
There's music added to whereas the others just have kind of the score. I don't know, I just like the fact that it's kind of just got a few moments of what the Luke Cage TV show was like, kind of scattered inside Defenders. I mean, they did it with all of them, but it is most obvious with Luke Cage. Luke Cage had much more of a strong, I think, aesthetic, so it stands out more when they kind of cut to it in the middle of another show.
But yeah, as I say, it's fine. It's good, but not great. It's very much just, a bit more for people who liked the Netflix shows. I mean, my girlfriend watched it with me, former Moderate Fantasy Violence guest, Julianne Benford, and she found it sort of okay-ish, partly because the 2 series she'd watched were Cage and Jones, and I think those are the 2 that are kind of sidelines. So she was a bit sort of, it was nice to see them again, but I don't care about most of what actually happened.
Yeah.
Well, she did say she thought Daredevil came over quite well as well, so, that's nice.
There we go. So, yeah, and it did kind of revive my interest in most of the characters, and I am looking forward to next year when we're getting more Jessica Jones, more Daredevil. I'm certainly very excited for those.
It's Jones, Cage, then Daredevil, I think, so yeah, it could be a good year.
Yeah, that will be a good year, yeah. Those are the shows I'm most looking forward to. Pretty much in that order.
Cool, and in the meantime, we'll see you, I think, later this year for The Adventures of Gunman.
Yeah, that's the Punisher, right.
That is the Punisher, yeah. Although I'm sure there must be a character called Gunman, but anyway...
That'd be way too unsubtle.
You underestimate comics.
Next, we will be discussing the 7th series of Game of Thrones. Winter is here, and so is Daenerys and her dragons. The noble houses of Westeros are still fighting each other, and the army of the dead is marching down from the north to bring the long night. This is the penultimate series of the show, and the stakes of the characters could not have been higher. We've seen all 7 episodes of Series 7. I can imagine we'll be going in with spoilers probably quite early on it'd be difficult to talk about this without at least some spoilers for some episodes. So if you're chronically spoiler adverse, then look in the show notes and you'll find the timestamp of the next segment to skip ahead. Okay, with that in mind, you have been warned for spoilers. Nick, what did you think of this series?
I mostly quite liked it. I think they've definitely been doing some slightly weird things with the pacing this year, which has ended up being one of the most discussed elements, certainly in the more sort of analytical circles. Like whether the fact that they've clearly been speeding the pacing up as we get towards the end, which is something that happens in, all stories, has been making it a very different and strange show compared to a lot of the previous Game of Thrones episodes. But the increased pacing has given us quite a lot of quite fun fan service moments. There's only been a couple of moments where they've really done a couple of silly pacing things that have really taken me out of the moment. In fact, basically, it's just the really obvious one from the penultimate episode, which I'm sure we'll get to in a minute. A lot of the other stuff, I think I can just take it as them skipping over time to avoid boring me, or to avoid some of the long walking subplots of previous seasons, which I think did serve a lot of good characterisation at the time, but I can see how you might want to maybe cut over them a bit, or at least cut to the interesting interactions, or the more novel interactions at this stage. And the last episode did, I think, put everything together fairly neatly. There's a couple of subplots I have niggles with here and there, but I think they did do a good job of bringing it together at the end and making it seem like it's going somewhere. I think there's a sense that it's perhaps not as unpredictable as it used to be, because ultimately Game of Thrones, although it had a slightly unconventional, raggedy story shape, is still a story. It is probably going towards something that at least resembles the conclusion that everyone thinks it does. The people are going to fight the dead. One of them will win, and then there'll probably be a follow-up squabble about who gets to be king, which meant certain things had to happen. But yeah, I'm still very much with it, I think, for now. I'm certainly feeling pretty high on the finale, which I think was one of the best episodes of the series, which helps.
Yeah, I think they're definitely drawing towards a conclusion. If you think back to the episode we did about Series 6 last year, we said very much that Series 6 felt like the end of Act 2. They're definitely drawing the middle to the close. And this felt like, this is a substantial proportion of the climax, the ending, in that not only are there the pieces set for sort of the final scene, but we're deep in it. We're aware of what the alliances are and who's on whose side and what the major battles will be in the final series. So it's pretty much come down to, give or take, three sides. Daenerys and most of the good characters, the people who may be considered heroes, such as, Jon Snow, Tyrion. Then obviously there's the remaining Lannisters, people who are still loyal to them. And you've kind of got to that point now. We know what the teams are. We know what the dynamics are. And we're going to see basically the three-way clash in the final series between these three factions.
Well, I don't know, maybe that to an extent is why some people think it was a bit predictable, because inevitably next year is the big 2 or 3 way fight. So this series just had to get us from Daenerys is coming towards Westeros to Daenerys is here. She's met all the various people. They've all agreed to fight with her. And now it's going to be the bulk of the sympathetic characters versus the dead, with Cersei as a sort of fun-spoiling extra threat. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I am glad for is that they didn't do what a lesser show may well have done, which is really drag out the beat of Cersei's pretending to be on their side. Oh no, last-minute betrayal. A lesser show would probably have got a whole half season out of that. Game of Thrones, because it has at least some sense of expectation, got about 20 minutes out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't believe that Cersei could be won over so easily to unite with Daenerys and Tyrion, people she absolutely hates. Pretty much it was plain that she was playing some kind of angle or planning some kind of betrayal that was, is too much like her not to. So, yeah, I'm glad the fact that they didn't draw that out, and they packed a lot into that last episode. I also like the fact that they've got enough well-developed characters at this point that when they gather basically pretty much every named character together in one place, there's enough of, people about to make it actually look like a big kind of court scene with lots and lots of different people, and there's so many different interesting dynamics between the different characters. So people haven't seen each other for ages, people kind of pleased to see each other, people not so pleased to see each other. There's a lot of interesting, sort of web of relationships that can be explored through a few sort of knowing glances or just brief comments from one sort of supporting character to another. And they really put in the effort over the series to build up all these characters and to build up all this world and all the dynamics and all the different sort of desires and allegiances of different characters to really make an episode like this last one really, really meaty, even in the sort of small, subtle glances between characters.
I mean, they have been accused of rushing things through this season, but there are a lot of things they have held off for a while, which means they can now rush them through again, and it actually still has a lot of impact. Like, a lot of those characters going back to King's Landing for the first time in a very long time does still have some sort of impact. And things like the Clegane brothers meeting.
Yeah.
I'm glad they later revealed that the Hound stormed off for a reason, because otherwise that bit where he sort of confronted his brother and then left was really weird. He sort of jumped out mid-meeting. Then again, so did the evil Greyjoy, who I enjoyed a lot, to be fair. The evil Greyjoy, as played by the man from Borgen. He hasn't had any scenes quite as amazingly memorable since the one where he invaded that boat, but he is still just enjoyably terrible.
Yeah, that was a good episode of this series. I think it was the second episode. They ended with the large Greyjoy on Greyjoy naval battle. So yeah, there's been some good episodes. Certainly lots of good battle ones this series. I really liked I think it was episode 5, the one that ended in the kind of Daenerys attacking the Lannister army and kind of cooking them with the dragon and then overrunning them with Dothraki. That had a sort of moment at the end when you thought Jaime might be about to sacrifice himself to try and kill Daenerys, or might get killed by a dragon, or the moment that like Bronn might also have been killed trying to use their giant crossbow to bring down a dragon. There was a lot of kind of like, is someone going to get it in this scene? It is Game of Thrones, potentially someone major could get it.
Not that many major characters did get it. Well, yeah, Olenna Tyrell got it. That was a sad scene. And of course, since we're doing full spoilers, the immensely satisfying death of Peter Baelish towards the end there.
Yeah, that was good. I thought he might hang around to the last series before he got it, but I kind of like the fact that he was the big celebrity death of the finale of Series 7.
I don't know. I think they've done a decent job of conveying that his sort of slightly weird grooming of Sansa was getting increasingly obvious to her. And, as Sansa was increasingly becoming more and more the powerful Lady of Winterfell and the slightly less powerful person she was in earlier series, I think it's almost necessary for her to, give Peter Baelish a good punishing to, assert herself.
Yeah.
A part of me isn't sure that the storyline of Sansa and Arya semi-arguing for the last few episodes, I don't know. That was a weird storyline. I'm not sure if, retrospectively, it's meant to be some sort of massive bit of play acting, except a lot of the time they seem to be alone. So, if so, it seemed a bit weird.
I found that plotline a little tedious. It didn't seem like it was really going anywhere or achieving much other than, there's enough drama in the world of Game of Thrones. They don't need an additional kind of falling out between nominal allies. There's enough kind of uneasy alliances and kind of complex tensions without people you'd expect to be on their side suddenly not being on each other's side. But I guess they're trying to explore the fact of these two characters, Sansa and Arya, aren't particularly similar to start with, and they've been separated for a long time and have had very different experiences.
Yeah, obviously, a lot of this storyline is sort of characters who've been separated for a long time finally coming together, or for the first time coming together, like Daenerys meeting a lot of the Westeros-based cast, the remaining non-dead Starks, were they all in the same place at the same time, or had Jon left by the time the other two arrived? I'm not sure. No,
they've not all been together. It's only in this episode, I think, that Jon found out that Arya was still alive. Jon's only just discovered that there are 3 other Starks still alive, and they've not been all 4 of them reunited, and I think that'll be the first episode of the next series.
And of course, by the time they're reunited, one of them knows that Jon isn't actually a Stark anyway. He is a Stark still, technically. He is the product of a marriage between Stark and Targaryen.
Yeah, it's just not the way he thought it was.
Well, he thought he was the marriage between Stark and random prostitute, yeah.
Yeah.
I did like because they technically revealed Jon's true parentage at the end of last series. Yeah. But I liked the way they gave it a big, hefty reminder for anyone who hasn't been really studying it. It's like, no, he's a Targaryen, he's one of them. Here's an actual flashback picture of someone with white hair kissing Jon's mum, just in case you don't get it. Just in case you don't get that this is now, we're now going to cut to a scene of a man having sex with his aunt.
Yeah, that was
very much as incest. Do you get it? This is incest.
Yeah, I was wondering at what point Jon was going to find out, and would it be before or after he did the nasty with Daenerys?
That was inevitable. That was Chekhov's incestuous penis.
On that, my favourite joke I saw about that, and I'm not sure who said it, because it was in a comment on The Guardian. The Guardian do a rolling blog about each episode of Game of Thrones, and the top comment, which was probably funnier written down, but I'm going to say it out anyway, and this is my favourite joke in it so far, is about Jon Snow just said, he's got ants in his pants. Yeah, it's really good, isn't it? I salute you, random commenter.
That is... Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, I mean, to be fair, the other storyline, which I've seen some criticism of, and I don't know, I'm not entirely sure which side I fall on it, is the Jon Snow-Daenerys relationship, as in, I've read a few critical reviews of Game of Thrones, as in just general reviews. And I have seen both people saying this relationship has really brought out the best, most electric acting for both Kit Harington and Emilia Clarke. And I've also seen, this is crap, they have no chemistry. It's a major problem that they're leading so much of this season on a relationship between two actors who have no chemistry. So where do you fall, Alistair? Electric chemistry or no chemistry?
Yeah, I think they had some chemistry. I mean, it's kind of weird because they're both kind of withdrawn and kind of like characters who keep a close check on their emotions for obvious reasons. So I think they did a good job of trying to have it kind of simmering below the surface. I mean, I don't know, I've seen better chemistry. It wasn't my favourite aspect of this series. But they kind of did a good job of showing like kind of the things were pulling on each character, how, Jon, how he felt he couldn't bend the knee, how Daenerys thought that was important, how they learned to sort of respect for each other and then to work together and then eventually bonded over saving each other's lives.
Yeah, I think it did slightly pick up for me in the last few episodes. It was in the first half of this season, like the first 3 or 4 episodes, I was a bit, look, you're clearly building to these two having sex because of Chekhov's incestuous penis. And yet, I don't know if I really feel it at this stage, but it did sort of come into itself a bit for me in the last few episodes. So, yeah, I'm sort of hovering in the middle on the chemistry yes or no question, to be honest.
I certainly think, as Game of Thrones has been criticised a lot in the past for, well, I like it, but I'm not really sure where it's going or what's going to happen. Well, now we've got a pretty good idea of where it's going and what's going to happen. It's certainly moving into endgame territory. And I guess the Daenerys-Jon Snow relationship is a key part of that.
But yeah, I think it's also part of the storyline they've been building on a slightly slower simmer this season. I mean, some people have been saying, this season has been too fast, but I think there's still some slow stuff being simmered for next season. Sort of the hinting about whether Daenerys' slightly destructive tendencies. This means she might not necessarily be the saviour everyone seems to want her to be.
Yeah, especially as Jon Snow is also, I guess, the legitimate king of Westeros as well.
So yeah, I don't know if there's an element of, we're just going to swap one dangerous, incestuous queen for another. But then I don't know who that means the logical queen is. Sansa, probably.
I think it'd be too neat if it's Daenerys, she wins, she conquers everything in the end, becomes queen. If Jon Snow becomes king, it's too obvious that he's the Aragorn figure, the kind of the straight arrow, that's the good guy. And I don't know. So my money might be on Sansa at this point.
I think certainly after this season, I think there's, in the same way with a lot of characters, there's a definite sense of Sansa getting her affairs in order, getting ready to take maybe a more substantial role in the plot. I was also quite surprised to see Jaime finally ditch Cersei towards the end of this episode, but I guess, considering they've always been vaguely hinting that Jaime might have at least slightly higher moral standards than her, that was probably inevitable.
Yeah, that's something I thought would happen at some point this series, that, Jaime would leave Cersei and, her madness and leave King's Landing behind in order to join the fight against the dead, because he's got, obviously, a man of principles, and this is obviously the most important fight going on in the world. So, interesting plot development, which I didn't expect. Now Cersei's pregnant, so there will be possibly the continuation of the Lannister line if she wins. Although the prophecy that she'll see all of her she'll bury all of her children, is that still valid, or did it just say she'll bury 3 of her children?
I don't know. I mean, I think she technically still has to bury all of them, so that's not going to go too well. I mean, I did see a theory that she's just flat out faking the pregnancy and it's just to manipulate Jaime, but I guess that might be a bit too soap opera even for Game of Thrones. It looks like the pregnancy might be real. Tyrion seems to think so, and he's a smart guy.
Yeah, so there's lots of interesting places to go in the next series.
Yeah, it really has reached a cartoonish extent to which all the even vaguely sympathetic characters are all on one side. And Cersei is on the other one. Yeah, the other point that slightly threw me out of the story in its rush to get things done was that famous bit in the, semi-infamous bit in the penultimate episode where Gendry managed to run to the wall in about 10 minutes, then they flew a raven down to Dragonstone and then fly the dragon back up again.
Yeah.
It just seemed weirdly quick and easy considering how much great talk has been made of the sheer distance involved in Westeros.
Yeah.
It used to seem like a great epic task to even communicate in Westeros. That was all the ice falling out of my freezer. And okay. Yeah, and now they seem to be communicating at email speed.
Yeah, one of the main things about Game of Thrones so far is it's been how long it takes to do anything, and the scale is very much like one of the things that makes this show so slightly different to other shows. This series definitely there's been a lot of characters that basically suddenly are where they need to be, like they can be having a meeting in Dragonstone and then in the next scene at the wall. And like you say, maybe they are just skipping over lots of walking time because they need to move the plot along as they're getting towards the end. But there is an element of that now that they're outside the constraints that the George R. R. Martin novels are placed on them. They can move characters around at will. And I guess that did reach its height in that penultimate episode. This ability for characters to appear kind of where they're needed now. When I was at Nine Worlds, I went to a panel discussion on Game of Thrones, and they called it the Littlefinger Express. A character's on the Littlefinger Express if they can suddenly go in one scene from like Dragonstone and the next scene be at the Wall or King's Landing or somewhere else. So yeah, there was a lot of that, and in that episode, but it did lead to some pretty epic battle scenes at the end. It was in service of a pretty engaging plot, so I'm willing to forgive them that.
Yeah, as I say, it was only really that one bit with the Ravens and during the penultimate episode, which did make me think slightly. That seems a lot less epic than I'm used to travelling Westeros being. The rest, I can just assume they blanked over a few days, much like Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk. I don't always assume that the timelines in Game of Thrones are in sync, and I think that's been particularly true this year.
Yeah.
I just thought it was a bit odd that they didn't kill anyone in the penultimate episode, really, except a couple of randoms and the Paul K. Priest. But I guess the Paul K. Priest is still technically a character.
Yeah, he's a reasonable sized character, although I thought someone larger in terms of the character, a more well-known character, might die in the penultimate episode, because there's usually a good few key deaths in the penultimate episode.
I really thought that giant would get it. He'd had like a nice, lovable scene where he talked about fancying Brienne. He's a generally popular character, but, I don't think really essential to the show continuing. So I really thought he would have been, prime penultimate episode canon fodder. But unless he died when the wall came down at the end of the finale, I think he's still with us.
I think he's still with us. I think one of the rules in Game of Thrones is if you don't see a body, assume people aren't dead. So, for example, when the guy was on the wall when it was brought down by the Night King, but I assume he's probably survived in some way, so he can continue his role of being basically the voice of the free folk.
Yeah, I guess he has his role, doesn't he? Oh well, hopefully next year will be a massacre. That's my dream.
I think there will be a lot of deaths in the next season.
Good. Only 6 episodes, so at least 2 or 3 major deaths a week, hopefully.
Yeah, probably. One of the criticisms I've been seeing of this series has been, especially in the penultimate episode, is at the point when the White Walkers resurrected like a dragon and then had a dragon on their side. I think there was a lot of people saying the show's become ridiculous or it's become too fantastical, which, I don't know, I'm sure some people, I guess they preferred it when it was more about the kind of medieval power plays between families and less about dragons and White Walkers. And I suppose some people prefer that. But I know, I do feel that this show has kind of telegraphed itself from the beginning as being a fantasy show about dragons and zombies and things like that. And to suddenly get in a huff because we're getting to the end and there's more dragons than you're really comfortable with is slightly disingenuous, as this has been obvious from the start. I certainly, from some of the things I've read, feel that there's an element amongst maybe some highbrow viewers who basically they kind of like Game of Thrones because it's popular, but they also like the fact they could pretend they're watching Wolf Hall, and they kind of, these viewers dislike being reminded they are actually watching a fantasy show that involves magic and dragons and stuff. And when that gets too much, they start to say, oh, it's jumped the shark, it's not as good as it was before. And I think it's not really fair to dismiss something just because it has fantastical elements. You should look at whether it's telling a good story.
Since it started, the graph line of, Game of Thrones with time elapsed at the bottom and amount of fantasy has gone up in a fairly steady way. It may have taken a bit of a jump in steepness this year, as they've had to start really addressing the Army of the Dead, Night King stuff. But even in the previous few seasons, there's always been at least a couple of really big White Walker moments in most of the seasons, just to remind us they're there. So I think it's just inevitable that now they're going to have to tackle them head on, and it's going to be a bit more fantasy-y and a bit more, we actually have to talk about the zombies-y. And as you say, it's been there since the beginning. The first ever scene of Game of Thrones had the White Walkers or the zombies or whatever in it, so...
Yeah, exactly.
'Twas ever thus. Maybe maybe it is to an extent the loss of the focus on political machinations as opposed to dragons fighting zombies.
Yeah, but that final episode had, a major political summit, and there was intrigue, and there was backhand dealing, and there was kind of plotting against each other. So I think the medieval power struggle element is still definitely present. It's just the kind of external factor that's driving it is fantastical.
Yeah, I think it's, as you said, the last episode did do a lot to satisfy my desire for a bit more, sitting and talking and backstabbing, which I must admit I did feel had been slightly overlooked in some of the previous few episodes in favour of big fights. So, yeah, I think considering that we're getting towards the end and that inevitably means bigger, faster action, I'm pretty happy with it, I think.
Yeah, me too. I'd say, yep, good series. If they can up the ante some more, then we'll have a fairly epic conclusion, I think. Next, we will be discussing Atomic Blonde, a new Cold War spy thriller starring Charlize Theron, James McAvoy, John Goodman, and Toby Jones. Charlize Theron plays Lorraine Broughton, a British spy sent to Berlin on the eve of the fall of the Berlin Wall to find a microfilm containing the identity of secret agents. While there, she meets MI6 station chief David Percival, played by James McAvoy, whose loyalty and methods are questionable at best. What follows is a stylish and at times bloody escapade through a divided Berlin. We saw this in the cinemas recently. Nick, what did you think of it?
I like this film quite a lot. It reminded me a bit of Baby Driver that we saw a few weeks back, in that it's, in some ways it was a fairly standard genre story. Like, I have not even seen that many spy films, and I could recognise the spy tropes unfolding in a fairly straightforward, tropey way in front of me. But it was just done with a lot of style, a lot of panache and enthusiasm, and with a very memorable soundtrack. I mean, to be honest, it probably works a bit better for me than Baby Driver, just because even though Baby Driver was a bit more appealing and adorable, this just had a bit more speed and action, and, you know, I'm impatient, what can I say? But yeah, I felt like it did a good job of carving a sort of a spy niche, you know, not too Bonds, not too Bourne, possibly somewhere between them, to be honest. It was very focused on being sleek, sexy and stylish, but also very focused on showing us, you know, realistic, messy violence.
Yeah, I think that after the Paul Greengrass Bourne films, there's certainly been an emphasis on kind of taking some of the slickness and the style out of spy thrillers and having them a bit more gritty, realistic, sort of street level based thing. Whereas this one, I like this film a lot because it was putting the style kind of back into the spy thriller. You know, there's kind of amazing music and there's very sleek scenes in clubs and sort of, you know, warehouse raves.
But still with the sort of the slightly messy, not too stylish violence scenes. Like, there's a particularly punishing fight between the lead character, Broughton, in a building with a henchman towards the end, which really is one of these sort of fights where it's just everyone's tired and everyone's suffering, but no one can stop, so they just sort of keep throwing themselves at each other in this sort of painful, exhausted way, which kind of, yeah, it hurts to watch a bit, but it's very good.
Yeah, that scene is an interesting one because it's something I've noticed that quite a few action films have done recently, and action TV shows, which is the action scene that's one long shot. So that one, it doesn't cut at all. It's just like a very long action scene which she fights her way through a building, and there's no cuts at all. And they do it in Daredevil. I think they did it in Iron Fist, and they did it in Defenders.
I don't know, I'm never sure how much of them are actually no cuts and how many of them are just quite sort of quick, clever cuts. Like, certainly the first season of Daredevil, there's quite what I think is now quite a famous scene where he fights his way down this corridor, just staggering from room to room, and the camera just does never pull off him, and it is quite, you know, it gets the desired effect. And then there's a sort of, to be honest, there's a similar scene in Daredevil Season 2, which is quite clearly a sort of slightly pale imitation of the first one. But yeah, it is definitely a thing. Yeah. I think I gather The Raid is also part of this movement, although I have not seen that film.
Yeah, actually, the Raid must be the progenitor of all these, because I was trying to work out which film it was, but yeah, that is probably the earliest example I could think of that. But I mean, yeah, it's a great scene. It's a really good action scene, and it really kind of conveys not only how like kind of brutal and exhausting these long fights are, but also kind of shows how good a performer Charlize Theron is to do this kind of long take and kind of get all the choreography correct and kind of make it all work over what is like 5 minutes of one continuous shot. So yeah, and she is kind of the core of this film and is very, very good in the main role. She's good at being witty and she's good at doing the action scenes and she's good at having kind of presence and menace at different times. I thought she's definitely the standout performer from this film, which is built around her.
Yeah, it's a very cold performance in a lot of ways, in which she's not sort of mugging up to the camera in a sort of look at me way, but it's still very sort of captivating and very hard to sort of look away from still, because she's just clearly central to the whole thing. And yeah, I mean, the sort of the icy cold style of it, as well as the sort of the way the lead character is sort of always quite expressionless. Everything is sort of blue and grey, and it's got the whole setting of sort of Berlin around the time of the fall of the wall is quite sort of immensely grey, accompanied by this sort of cold thudding techno that goes through the whole thing. It definitely has a look, this film, which is possibly one of the things I liked about it, as well as the fast-moving plot and the violence. It sucks you into this specific world for its duration. It
certainly did a good job of making Berlin look really, really cool. You're kind of between like kind of the underground parties in sort of East Berlin, you know, with this kind of flowering of underground culture that kind of Berlin's synonymous for that kind of cool. And also, like, there's lots of flashy cocktail bars and exclusive nightclubs. In many ways, Berlin is as much a character in this as any of the main characters. It's the whole thing is kind of sort of woven around it. The James McAvoy character has this speech at one point about how much he loves the city, and kind of everything he does is just for the love of the city and to keep playing the spy game he's playing in the city.
Yeah, I like that character. The idea being, he's this guy who was meant to be one of the head spies in Berlin, has sort of gone native and sort of started cracking up and just staying as long as he can on the underground scene. He is fun in a sort of nicely slimy way. He's a good character.
Yeah, and I thought James McAvoy did a great performance. Again, the character has a lot of presence whenever he's on screen. This kind of has a lot of interesting sort of tics and expressions and a real energy. So yeah, whenever he's on screen, you're always kind of looking at him. And also he has a good kind of dynamic with the Charlize Theron characters. They're not really sure if they can trust each other. That sometimes they're working together, sometimes they're working against each other. It goes back and forth.
Well, yeah, and he is constantly sort of mugging to the camera, whereas Charlize Theron, as I said, really isn't. They sort of bristle against each other quite well.
The other thing I really liked about this film is I have a real soft spot for period spy thrillers. I do like spying conspiracy thrillers that are set present day, but I generally think that like period spy thrillers are better. For example, there's the Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy adaptation that came out a few years ago starring Gary Oldman, and I'm really glad they didn't decide to kind of update it to present day and have them spying on like Al-Qaeda or something rather than, kind of keep it with the Cold War setting. I think the reason why I really like period spy thrillers is that a spy thriller needs to have like a political element to it. The looming collapse of the Soviet Union, the fall of the German Democratic Republic, the Berlin Wall's about to come down, Germany possibly reunited. A huge, like, epochal political event. But by setting your spy thriller in the period and engaging with the politics of the past, it avoids you having to make a comment on the politics of the present. If you update any of these spy stories, and this one's based on a graphic novel, or update any kind of Le Carré novels or Robert Ludlum or things like that to present, and you involve present politics, you're going to need to pass some kind of judgment on the current political state. Whereas in the past, you can kind of observe the politics from a historical perspective and more kind of weave them in as a kind of historical backdrop as part of your plot, rather than trying to make a commentary on what's happening right now. And I think that frees you up a bit more to tell a more interesting story when the kind of the politics is dealt in that way, if that makes sense.
Plus, it eliminates the question of why don't they just do everything on the internet?
Yeah.
And removes the long scenes of people typing quite quickly while shouting, "I'm in."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, techno-thriller directors, even though they've been making them for probably more than 20 years, still are incapable of finding a way to make people hacking look interesting. It's always just like kind of code and kind of weird geometric shapes flying across the screen whilst people shout things like, "Yeah, I'm in."
I'm out. I'm withdrawing. I don't know. I'm sure interesting cyber thriller hacking films are out there. I just haven't seen them. I'm just still bitter about the shitty hacking bits in that Fast and Furious film we saw. But anyway, I mean the dialogue in this is very genre. Like, people only talk like this in a spy film, but the film as a whole buys so heavily into spying. It's so drenched in spy that I don't think that's a problem. It is what it is. It was the same in Baby Driver when everyone just talks in a very crimey way. Yeah,
it's kind of embracing the tropes of the genre, which is kind of a genre we're all familiar with. Yeah, this is how people in this world speak. And obviously because it's kind of stylized to the point when this is kind of like, this is clearly a fantasy of what like being a spy is like. Again, the Paul Greengrass Bourne films were very much kind of like, right, what would this kind of character actually be like and what would it actually be involved? And this is kind of like, we're going to go the opposite way. Like, what's the fantasy of what this would actually be like?
Well, it's one of those things that happens, isn't it? Someone does a good film about, what would this sort of person actually be like? And then all the films about spies for the next 10 years are focused on recreating that in a less good way until eventually someone comes along and goes, actually, let's get back to the fantasy a bit.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't seen Spectre, the last Bond film, so I don't know where that fell on the Bond-Bourne fantasy reality spectrum.
Well, Spectre kind of ended up with the worst of both worlds in that it was shot in this kind of very Greengrass realistic way, but the plot was just pure fantasy, which didn't make it particularly believable. So this kind of like, this enormous organisation that's behind everything and secretly puppet mastering all the evil people in the world, and it's all for some reason created to purely to terrorise James Bond personally. because obviously everything must now be also a deep reflection on the character as well.
Yeah, it's a shame, as I quite liked Skyfall, and I thought that actually did quite a good job of balancing the two worlds, but no one seemed to like Spectre, so I just never bothered seeing it.
That was a good film. Pivoting back to Atomic Blonde, again, what I really liked is that this was a spy film with a sort of a female main character, which you don't see as often. Again, all the stuff we've been discussing so far, Bourne, Bond, the Smiley novels mentioned before, have all had like male protagonists. Which, again, good to have a spy movie with a woman protagonist. I guess they were trying to do a thing of kind of making her, I guess, sexy, but not too sexual or sexualized. They kind of sort of succeeded in that, sort of not. I can see they were trying to do something different with the character by making her, as you said, like quite cold towards the men in the film. There were a few bits that may have been a bit, trying to see what they're trying to do, but there are a few bits when they kind of sort of skirted around sexualizing the character. I guess I appreciate them trying to do something a bit different.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's a line to walk, and I suspect I am not the person to tell them definitively whether they succeed. Obviously, the idea is that it's still possible for the character to be sexy without it being bad sexualization. And yeah, it felt like it was mostly working, but I don't pretend to be the expert there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely, it's another big move for Charlize Theron in becoming the main action woman after this and Furiosa in Mad Max.
Yeah, and she's very good in these parts.
Yeah, I to be honest, if they're going to franchise one of these, I feel like this would probably be a better thing to franchise than Furiosa, because I feel like Furiosa might be a character where the more she comes back, the less impact it has.
Yeah, they've kind of told the story that character had. And of course, the thing about the Mad Max films is Mad Max is just a roaming kind of loner. He moves through people's lives and always moves on. The point of the Mad Max story is about the people who stay, and Furiosa is a character obviously who stays and tries to resolve the problems of that part of the world, while Mad Max just moves on to another part and some other problems.
Yeah, I mean, they could make a Furiosa film, but I don't know if it's I don't know. I'm sure it would be fine if they got someone good. It just seems like a character who might get a bit diminishing returns, whereas I feel like this character could be more easily just reused because there's something quite sort of tropey generic spy about it. It's something you can just plug into another spy story.
Yeah, I would be up for seeing Atomic Blonde 2 if they had brought back Charlize Theron, maybe set it a few years later during the kind of formal collapse of the Soviet Union, or update it to a different sort of 90s conflict. But yeah, I'd be up for seeing a sequel to this film.
It's good, fun spy film. I don't know if it's still at cinemas. It might just about still be at cinemas, or if you ever fancy something to watch on Friday night on Netflix and this comes up, yeah, I'd say give it a go. It's good.
Yeah, it'd be a good Friday night Netflix film. It's very, very stylish. Has an amazing soundtrack of 80s pop hits. And it's just really entertaining.
Okay, and lastly this fortnight, it's my recommendation from last time. This is Master of None. And up front, I only had time to skim through a couple of episodes for this podcast right now, although I did watch the whole season last year. But still, I have a lot of love for this. This is the sitcom written by Aziz Ansari and Alan Yang on Netflix, which focuses on Aziz Ansari as Dev, a young late 20, early 30 something, I think the character's roughly meant to be. Guy living in New York and going through life. Every episode broadly focuses on a sort of thematic aspect of his life as a New Yorker from an Indian background, dealing with dating, his parents. There's an episode called Indians on TV, which does lean heavily into the representation of Indians on TV. Yeah, it's a very interesting show. It's not actually an autobiographical, sort of fictional version of Aziz Ansari's show, but it does seem like there's at least a decent chunk of his own experience in there. But obviously, it's pointless getting into who wrote what games. But anyway, yes, it's a very good, critically acclaimed sitcom. The second season is also out, but I don't think either of us have watched any of that. But still, Alistair, what did you think of it?
Yeah, I liked it a lot. It's definitely made me laugh. It's got good characters. It's got good writing. It's quite a gentle humour. There weren't many times where I found myself kind of erupting in laughter. But there were a lot of good chuckles and a lot of good laughs. And each episode pretty much ends with a kind of warm, sort of uplifting bit that that kind of leaves you in a real good mood at the end, which is really nice. It's kind of what King of the Hill and the best episodes of The Simpsons do, which is kind of lots of jokes throughout, but rather than finishing on a joke, always finish on a warm kind of moment of togetherness.
Yeah.
Which I liked. Yeah, I like the fact, I like the gentle humour, I liked kind of the warmth to it. What I also liked is, I don't know. I get the feeling I've seen a lot of sitcoms about people who are losers or down and outs or kind of at the bottom of society. And obviously there's lots of very funny shows that take that premise. But I kind of like this because it was a bit different. I felt that he's more, I don't know, average to successful sort of person. He's not kind of a with an eye sort of struggling, completely unemployed actor. He's getting regular commercial work. He's quite successful, or he's moderately successful in his career. He's not a complete unlucky in love loser. He is, someone who's at least moderately successful with women and dating. I kind of like the fact that they didn't decide to go for, wouldn't it be funny if we made this guy a complete loser and everything he does just kind of goes wrong. Whereas there's a kind of, they managed to find a way to make the character moderately successful in his endeavours, but also it's still been funny and there's still been plenty of escapades.
I don't know, it's, in some ways it sort of seemed like a sort of halfway point between like brutally awkward stuff like Peep Show and or Curb Your Enthusiasm, I guess, the American version, or cuddlier sitcoms like Parks and Recreation, which is where I think a lot of us know Aziz Ansari from originally. A lot of the comedy is sometimes built on these situations he's in, but on the other hand, it's never horrendously awful. There's unlikely to be any sign of Aziz Ansari getting caught on the toilet whilst brutally shitting himself, as in the memorable scene in Peep Show.
Yeah.
It's very sort of, oh dear, this is a bit weird, let's gently laugh at it and move on. Yeah, it leans on that sort of warmth and charm to make the occasional sort of message moments go over fairly quickly and softly.
Yeah.
Aziz Ansari's personal charm is obviously pretty huge in this. There's a weird sort of me so cute dialogue style he talks in, which I think would be perhaps slightly unbearable if delivered by a lot of other actors. But obviously because this is his vehicle for him to do his thing, he sells it effortlessly.
He's very, very charming, which is what I, again, really liked about the show, is that, a lot of the show is sold on Aziz Ansari's charm. And he kind of, again, he has this kind of slightly quirky way of talking or constantly making these sort of little jokes that are quite charming and stuff. And you can see, again, why he's sort of successful as an actor and sort of successful on the dating scene, because he's got sort of some charm and some personality that people find very likeable. And then it's interesting how later in the series, again, I don't know how much we should say for spoilers, but when he gets into a more serious relationship, his constant kind of making silly jokes out of everything does actually become a bit of an issue when, it's okay when you're dating someone and you just want to kind of have a laugh all the time, but with the fact that when people want to talk about serious issues, he usually makes like a kind of slightly silly joke, does actually eventually you see like, oh, I can see how this is also a bit of a character flaw as well as a character strength.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff, again, yeah, spoilers fine, but I guess I'll try not to just spoiler bomb it. But yeah, the sort of the serious relationship issues part at the end is one of the things that I think for a lot of people probably moved it from this is a nice little comedy drama into this is something very sort of feels quite moving and very sort of relatable. It is not my place to say how much of this may or may not be autobiographical for either of the two co-writers, but it felt very relatable. It felt very this is real. This relationship sort of is something I've, if not lived through, and felt similar things to. And to bring back a phrase from earlier in the podcast, which was in turn a reference to earlier episodes of the podcast, yeah, I think that was probably for a lot of people when this went from being a cute comedy drama to one of those transcendent works that gets put on best of the year lists. Yeah,
because it does really kind of resonate with people's sort of actual experiences.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like he's captured something about modern life. It did feel a lot like he was saying something, or at least portraying how things are nowadays. I'm not going to, you could say something twee like, oh, it's Friends for 2017, when it clearly isn't. I think it's a lot more personal and less generic than that. But the real relatability of it does make it work. It does feel like something that someone who does live in the real world has written and managed to actually get the real world across. It doesn't feel like constructed or like a comedy. It just feels like he's lived in the real world, thought about it, and now actually has something he wants to say about it. Yeah.
Well, I quite liked the episodes. In fact, I really liked the episodes that clearly had something to say. As you said, like there's a good one called Ladies and Gentlemen, which kind of shows how dating, or I guess modern life in a large urban environment is different for men and women. Like it starts with how the character Dev and his friend walking home from a bar, and then it also follows a different character who's a woman walking home from the same bar, and how their experiences are different. That like it's basically a lovely, nice evening stroll for Dev and his friend, but for the woman, it's a harrowing experience of being like kind of followed by men and have inappropriate things shouted at her. And it's kind of strange how it's kind of making a really serious point about an issue, kind of the harassment of women that isn't funny at all, but the humour is in the contrast and also in how completely oblivious the men are to the experiences of the women around them. So it's a difficult needle to thread, making humour out of such a important topic. But the fact that he is able to find humour that's not objectionable in this makes also the kind of the point he's trying to make, kind of more accessible and easier to digest. It sneaks the point in through the comedy and hopefully takes these kind of views to a wider audience.
Well, yeah, I mean, it always feels like a story with these characters rather than let's stop the show for a lecture. Like, it's the same with the Indians on TV episode. It does just feel like he's actually pointing out, this happens, and as an Indian person, you can see how I might find it a bit weird or annoying without it being sort of feeling too much like he's jabbing the finger at you and saying, you're racist.
Yeah.
It is, a way of getting the point across, a spoonful of sugar, medicine go down, etc.
Yeah. In the Indians on TV episode, he's also clearly telling a story about this specific character in this specific circumstance, and you can see from that there's the wider point. There's also, the other one I really liked was the one about his dad and his story as an immigrant to America, which is also kind of, at the same time you get his friend who's Taiwanese, and his friend's dad's story as an immigrant to America. And again, there's a brilliant bit when the dads separately asks their sons just to spend a few more minutes with them. And they say, no, I'd just rather go to the cinema with my friend. And you kind of get the backstory of each dad kind of in a few minutes, and kind of how hard their life was and how much they went through in the view that their sons would have a better life in America. And then just how basically eternally ungrateful they are. Or even just completely unaware of what their dads went through. And it's very funny, but it does have like a sort of a subtle point to make. And I really like those episodes that did things like that. I thought they were very good.
Well, yeah, it's sort of, I guess, the way it sort of starts, uses those to tell you something about the character, which in turn builds towards the ongoing storylines towards the end. And yeah, it's just, this season certainly is one of incredibly sort of, well constructed, I think. Honestly, the only time it hit some slightly bum notes was some of the stuff with his friend Arnold, who sometimes felt weirdly like a sitcom character compared to everyone else. But he was also quite funny in other bits, so I'm not going to, harp on it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I found him quite funny. I mean, he had some of the biggest laughs, but that's because he's clearly created to be a ridiculous character for a sitcom, where some of the others some of his other friends felt much more like believable human beings who just said funny things occasionally or had unusual quirks.
Well, it came and went. Every so often there was a slightly OTT bit where he bounced like a child on a sofa, which felt like it was in a different show in some weird way. Yeah, and then he'd sort of reset to a more normal level in a more sort of fitting to this show level in his next scene, and it would be fine. So yeah, it's just one of these things. I mean, ultimately it's probably just the writers having a laugh. It's probably not really something that needs intense thematic consideration. Yeah, I thought the character of Aziz's dad was very funny. Just always had like unusual lines, and they have this running joke that because he's an A&E surgeon, he's constantly getting phone calls about people in awful circumstances that he needs to run off to to kind of perform surgery on. And there's a great one when he just gets the call and he just hears, "Hello? Oh, a cucumber?" And you know exactly what's coming. And he goes, "Where?" He's like, "Oh man, the butthole." And then he just hangs up the phone and goes, "I've got to go." And you kind of, it's brilliant, just a few lines, and it kind of fills in everything that's happened. It's very efficient writing. Trivia-wise, those are Aziz Ansari's actual real-life parents. No, I did not know that. Yeah. That would explain why the mother was maybe a little wooden. But the dad was very, very funny. But yeah, no, it's a good show. I have heard, I don't know, I've not seen quite as much buzz around season 2, and like the couple of reviews I've read have been a bit sort of, it's kind of disappointing compared to the first one, but I'll probably still watch it. I can see why trying to follow this might lead to a bit of the difficult second album syndrome. Yeah, and also one of these things, kind of this surprising, oh my god, you've got to watch this show, it's really good, sort of viral hit. The second series are always, they can never live up to it, it's just a fact. But obviously I haven't seen the second series, so we'll have to wait and see, I guess. There were certainly a few episodes in the first series that did give me some big laughs. The one when he's having an affair with Claire Danes, well, character played by Claire Danes, I thought was very funny. It's got a great montage involving a banana split that is best seen rather than spoilers by me. But that episode was one of the ones I absolutely did, kind of nearly fall off the sofa laughing. It was very funny. Yeah, second season notwithstanding, I haven't seen it, but yeah, the first season of this is, I think, one of the best things I've seen on TV in the last couple of years.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and you're right. It has kind of captured something about urban living today, and it's more than just kind of mentioning Uber and Yelp and smartphones and stuff. It's just they seem to have kind of, sat down and thought about like what are the dynamics and sort of dramas and weird sort of funny things that happen to kind of people in their late 20s, early 30s, and found something that has actually something to say about it that's also funny and has interesting characters. And you're right, and that's why this transcends from being just a sitcom with funny characters in it to something that actually seems to have something to say about life today. Well, Nick, thank you for introducing me to Master of None. I did really like it as a TV show. Ordinarily, this would be where I would make a recommendation to you for the next episode. But actually, we're going to vary what we're doing in the next episode and try out a new format, when for the whole episode, we're only going to be talking about one work for the next 2 weeks.
But don't worry, we're not going to stop reviewing things, because the main reason we do this is because I like reviewing things. We're going to review one thing, and then we're going to talk about a related topic, question, or thing in an attempt to more fully live up to our pop culture and the world around it motto. Plus, we've got one sort of TV pop culture blogger, that's me, hello, and one sort of politics blogger, that's Alistair. So, yeah, it's a one-on-one thing. It's something new, it's something different. It'll hopefully give us a broader canvas of things to discuss. And yeah, we'll see how it goes. We'll be sorry to see the recommendation feature go, but maybe some fortnights there won't be anything good on, and we'll just, pull something out of our past.
It may be back in one shape or form at some point, but who knows? The future is a blank tapestry.
Beauty of this is, it's our podcast, we can do what we like, and if it's not working, we can just do it a couple of times, then stop doing it.
Yeah. That's all we have time for. Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please leave us a review, as it helps other people find out about the show. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where we post our episodes, bonus audio clips, and occasional written pieces from Nick and myself.
You can also follow us on social media. We're on Twitter as @MFV Podcast. We're on Facebook as nothing, just Moderate Fantasy Violence. Just search for us and the logo should come up. Okay, I've been Nick Bryan. You can find more from me on my website at nickbryan.com, or you can follow me on Twitter as @NickMB.
I've been Alistair Ball. You can find more of me on Twitter at AlistairJRBall, or you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Download the next episode when we will be talking about Stephen King adaptation It. Thanks very much for listening. We'll see you then. Goodbye.
Bye.
So, tune in next time for an experiment in form.
Yes, tune in next time for the world's most difficult experimental podcast about pop culture.
Yeah.
That's a lie.